Welcome, my name is Luis Soros. I'm a 2011 Teach for America Corps member here in Hawaii. I've taught 7th grade math at Wheeler Middle School for 2 years now. First off, thank you for kind of exploring this folder, and I'm really excited to share this with you. I want to use this video as a way to explain to you the reasoning behind designing the folder and kind of its purpose. The entire focus was to shift from a teacher-centered classroom to a student-centered classroom, to push the cognitive burden onto students, if you will. It really came out of my frustrations my first year of teaching, that kids were bored, I was exhausted, all these things, and they didn't necessarily learn. They got better at math, but they didn't necessarily become smarter people, and I really wanted to kind of try and change that. I'm going to be honest with you, the results have been incredible, and for the first time kids have started to really love math, but it is a difficult thing to implement, especially if your management isn't already down. And with that, I really recommend that if you kind of take some of these ideas to really ensure that your management and high expectations are already there. That was one of the biggest hurdles I kind of faced. That being said, I also have a couple tips that really helped me kind of start off on a really solid foot this year that hopefully you'll find helpful. If you have any questions at any point, you can always send me an email at oros.luis@gmail.com, and I would love to kind of share ideas and really help you get started on a really good foot. Hope you enjoy. The classroom was self-paced, meaning they were given the resources they needed to succeed and learn for that particular quarter, and then given the autonomy to kind of explore their own curiosities. The focus was really to teach them to rely on each other, to teach each other concepts, and to really be very collaborative.
I'm asking you like the right answer, is it not negative x equals negative 15. That's right. If you divided 15,
So at first, kids will not like this. They're going to raise their hand, they're going to ask you, I don't know what to do, what should I do? And really my role shifted from telling them the answer to, in this case, helping them find their own resources. I jump around from group to group and just basically help guide their thought process. So in the first couple clips, you saw them working with the iPads. But I really want to see, can the same collaborative process happen if you take it away? So the sheets that you have here are also in the folders. They're called Measuring Up Live Sheets. And it was the same idea. I gave them the sheets, it explained how to do it, and I really showed them how to rely on each other and how to read the notes for themselves and then teach it to themselves.
Sorry, keep going.
okay, I got 1,000.
Keep going.
And then put that over 16. Okay, but there's not that big of a number here.
Now, we were really fortunate this year to have the iPads and for them to really access kind of resources online. But I also want to let you know that my first year near the end, we didn't have it, and we were still able to do it. I know some of the footage you saw earlier in the class, kids did not have iPads. Really, the issue wasn't so much the technology, and I don't want you to be fearful that you can't do a self-paced classroom if you don't have the technology. And I think the biggest hurdle was letting kids realize that they can learn it themselves, whether it's from a book, a worksheet, a textbook, really breaking that misconception that all information has to come from you as the teacher and that instead they can do it. And I think once they have that mental shift, they really start to rely on each other and being willing to go up on the board and kind of teach each other concepts. And I think that's the biggest kind of lesson you really want to instill in them from the beginning, is this idea that, yes, you can learn this. When I began researching student-centered classroom models, one thing that popped up a lot was how important classroom setup itself was. It had to lend itself both to group work as well as individual work. So my students sat in teams of 4, oftentimes facing their own whiteboard, so not necessarily the front of the class. And the goal was to basically allow students to work by themselves if they wanted to or preferred, but also with teams on the board if they needed help. The world that you're seeing right now is how we track progress, and we try to make it as visual for our students as possible. One of the papers I found talked about reform efforts in California, where they found that the average teacher wastes 10 minutes getting their students in and out of a classroom. So for me, in a 40-minute period, that only left 30 minutes of instructional time and actual work. In order to minimize that, every morning I had 2 students who would come in and put everyone's homework and classwork into these manila folders. Each team had manila folders for their students. The wonderful thing was that if a student were absent and they were to come back, all of their missing assignments were already in their folder.
You got number 2?
The entire first 2 days of school were spent teaching my kids how to walk in and out of
You
my
have 3
classroom
minutes for your
quickly so
flash
that they can
drill.
get to
In
work right
3,
away.
2, 1, go.
I would tell my students that they needed to be silent. And the moment a single
And that was not
student
silent. Everyone
broke
back outside.
silence, everyone would go right back outside and we would do the process over and over again until they got it right. Once they came in silently, what you're seeing right there is team captains, which is one person in the team is designated to go in and grab the manila folders you saw being filled earlier that already have the day's classwork and homework ready. So as soon as students sit down, they write down the homework for the day and they open up their folder and they do a flash drill, which is just basically a multiplication tables drill. Now, the curriculum itself is designed around the Common Core standards. Each quarter was more focused on the concept and not so much the standards. So quarter one was number sense, like positive and negative numbers, fractions, decimals, and kind of converting between them. Quarter two was about expressions and equations and learning kind of how to manipulate between them. Quarter three was about proportions, units, rates, and ultimately geometry. And the last quarter, quarter four, was about statistics and probability. Now, within each quarter, students were basically given the worksheets or the con sheets or whatever they needed and allowed to explore at their own concept. At no point did I ever stand in the class and lecture and like, today's this is lesson, tomorrow we're going to do this. And instead, I kind of let kids take as long as they needed to really learn the material. Now, the biggest kind of criticism I got in the beginning was, well, how are you going to get through all the curriculum? Honestly, you won't. Some of your kids will just simply not be able to get through all the curriculum, but that's fine. Like you'd much rather have them focus and really struggle as long as it takes to really understand number sense, even if it takes all year, which some kids did. But for the first time, they actually understand it now. And I think that's the best thing you could really do for them is set up the right foundation. And the kids that will fly will explore and they will do incredible things. But I think get away from this fear of worrying that you're not going to get through all the curriculum. Because you won't. If you do this the right way, it's fine if it takes a long time for certain kids and others won't. And I think that's the first step in really keeping them motivated. Each concept in the folder is split into 3 parts. Map it, practice it, apply it. Mapping gives them a conceptual understanding, practicing actually allows them to tackle the problems, and then applying it is the problem-based style learning. In the Map It folder, you're going to find 2 basic things. The first is the actual document with the vocabulary words relating to that unit. Have students read the definitions for each word, rewrite their own definitions, and then provide a visual example. At the very end of that document, there's space for them to visually connect and represent those words on a map. Now, the point of these maps isn't necessarily to tell students this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer, but instead to kind of give them a frame of reference from which to start looking at how these concepts relate to each other. The second basic thing you're going to find is an already made map that my students and I kind of worked on and collaborated throughout the year for each unit. And again, these maps that I presented to them after they had done their own was a way to frame the conversation of basically asking like, oh, why is expressions related to equations, or what are the differences between them, etc. What you're seeing here is the packet I had given to my students with all the vocabulary words. What they first do is they go through each definition, rewrite a new definition that makes more sense to them, and provide a visual example. So at first, I have them work by themselves because I want them to think critically about the words.
It's awkward, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
When you start going through the different packets, you're going to notice that a lot of the words repeat from one packet to the next. And really the point is to give them a strong enough foundation where they really understand the word. I don't want them to just see it once in one packet and then never again for the rest of the year. It really is through repetition that it builds on itself. Once they've gone through each word, written a new definition, and provided visual examples, the back part of the packet has a section for them to start making their map. At first, I have them make an individual map. I want them to think critically about the words by themselves first before they start asking for help or interacting with other students. Once they've made their individual maps, I have them make a second map with a partner. This really forces them to have conversations about which connections are better than others and why. It's during this time that I jump from group to group and really start asking them, why did you connect this, or what is that? What is a real number?
A number that consists of irrational and rational numbers.
Good. So all numbers, or all real numbers, are numbers, and then from real numbers you have your rational numbers and your irrational numbers. A natural number is a rational number, which is a real number, which is a number.
So why don't you say it was directly number?
Positive and negative number. Give me an example. Correct. Correct. What is a rational number? The last step is the class map, where I give them the one that I made for those exact same words. They go through it with a partner and start to see where their connections were different than mine, and more importantly, why. Variables and constants. When I tell you to solve for a variable, what are you really doing? Hold on, Mr. Atherton. Isolating the variable. How do we isolate a variable, Mr. Sanabria? Inverse operation. What is the difference between an expression and an equation? It's only when students actually start to understand these concepts and what they actually mean that we really are able to have meaningful conversations. So what you're seeing right here is a quick practice drill, a review drill that I have with my students. So that when we go to part 2, practice it, and a student asks for help, rather than telling them, oh, well, first take away 3 or take away 5, I can just give them the vocabulary word to kind of trigger their memory. Ward. 4, what is that? What kind of integer? Give me an example of a constant that is not a positive integer. Mr. Sanabria. -2, what is that? Negative integer. Give me an example of a constant that is not a positive integer and not a negative integer. The idea of schema mapping came from a lot of the work that Sean Briel and Dan Nash did. Now their idea was taking these vocabulary words that students are going to deal with during that unit, allow them to kind of struggle through the definitions and come up with definitions for themselves, and then try to visually connect those concepts in a way that makes sense. Now in the beginning, the maps are terrible, and a lot of students don't necessarily understand how these concepts interrelate. Over time, however, the quality of the maps get better and better and better, and then the level of conversations you have with your kids gets to a much higher level. In the Practice It folder, you're going to find 3 things. The Khan Academy sheet, which my students use to work on the iPads, the Measuring Up Live sheet, which you saw some students working with earlier, and the Extra Practice folder, which is what I used my first year of teaching with Dane Carlson and Jeff Chen. Now, it does not matter which of the 3 you use, the idea is the same. Give students the resource and allow them to teach it to themselves. I'll be honest, they're going to hate it at first. They're going to raise their hand, they're going to say they're confused or they don't know what to do and simply just want to give up. And part of the reason is every teacher before them has probably just given them the answer, just showed them exactly how to do it and where to start. And for the first time, you're telling them that they can do it themselves. If you have the option with Khan Academy and the technology, it's wonderful. There are kinds of videos and they can use their hints and they can go through that process. The Measuring Up Live sheets, however, also have the step-by-step instructions on how to solve the problems for each concept on the sheets. And even the Extra Practice folders, if you go through those student packets, has examples and actually gives the step-by-step instructions that they can follow. The beginning of the year was pretty much just putting out fires. Students would raise their hand, they wouldn't know what to do, they'd just ask you to basically give them the answer. Because of this, I didn't really allow them to use each other for help yet. I really wanted them to realize that they can actually read the question for themselves. They can read the step 1, step 2. So what you're seeing right now is they pretty much work by themselves, and I wanted to set that expectation first. Starting in about second quarter, students finally realized what the expectations were. That, look, you can actually learn this. You can do this for yourself. Once that expectation was set, I allowed them to use their partner, what I called War Buddy. And if it was a team of 3, the 3 of them could work together. So at this point, they still were not allowed to go in groups and work on the board yet. Instead, they just started to learn how to use each other for help. Now, not every student wanted to use help yet. Some students were perfectly comfortable just sitting there by themselves and getting work done on their own, which is fine. The system allowed them to do it. Now, starting around Christmas was when the real learning actually happened for the year. They had finally learned the expectations, that they can teach it for themselves, they have the resources, and that I'm not just going to give them the answer. And it was at that moment that the class really became a very dynamic environment. Kids were now allowed to go on the board, do the concepts, ask each other for help. They could stand up, walk around the classroom, and ask anyone they needed for help, mainly because they knew the expectation was that you can ask anyone for help as long as we're doing work.
Why do you enjoy it?
When we didn't have iPads to constantly check their work and we did the worksheets instead, I would have the answers and they would solve the problems, come up to me, check their work. I would say yes or I would say no. If it was yes, it means that they were totally done and they can move on to the next sheet. If it was a no, it meant that some part was wrong, but I wasn't going to tell them what it was. Then they had to go back to their seat and try it again.
The first three are there. The next.
Now, it's really important to point out that I wasn't just sitting at my desk this whole time. I was still very much involved in the classroom dynamics, often walking around from group to group and really helping teams that are struggling by giving a hint or posing a question, anything to really get them in the right direction.
Put your iPad like this.
In the applied folder, you're going to find three basic things. The first is a question bank for each standard in that concept. The second thing is what I call developing problem-solving skills, which is a list of measuring up live sheets that I worked with my students to teach them how to start solving word problems, the strategies from reading the problem, drawing pictures, etc. And the third thing is the PDF file that says all the Dan Meyer folders are in the beginning of the curriculum. The majority of class time was spent refining maps or actually learning the concept through Khan Academy or the Measuring Up live sheets. And the whole purpose of that was to give them both the conceptual and the procedural understanding for these concepts. Then, every Monday and every Friday, one of the class periods was spent doing a problem-based project, essentially, which is the Dan Meyer sheets, and that is the part 3, and you'll find that folder in the very beginning of the curriculum. Now, the problems I would choose did not necessarily have anything to do with the concepts we were learning. I really wanted my students to be comfortable with realizing we could be learning one thing, but I want you to think critically about how you can use what you have learned, or maybe not, to solve this problem. The first part simply would pick a video, pick a problem, and start playing. At the end of the video, I would simply just ask them a question without necessarily giving them any information on how to solve it.
Tell me how long it's going to take to pop the other two squares. Now you can't really see it right here, but he just popped the first square. Tell me how long it's going to take to pop this square, and then the third one. I want you to spend 5 minutes with your teams to come up with the questions that you need to ask in order to find the relevant information. Go.
Yeah, but like we need Time it takes to take.
So, all right, what's something we need to know? The area of the first square we pop. Why?
Because we need to know how many you pop in 10 minutes.
All right. Now let me ask the rest of you. What are you gonna do if I give you the area? What are you gonna do with it?
You have to.
That's what the rest of you.
Then we just gonna have to.
The next part was to just basically allow them to brainstorm, is that what information do I need to know? Then my job would be to walk around and just start prying, asking them questions, inquiring as to what they're coming up with and help guide their thought process.
Like the length over the time that it took for the original.
Once they were done brainstorming, I actually gave them the information that was relevant, and they wrote it down, and they decided on how they were going to best use that information.
20 minutes to figure this out. Go.
Yeah, writing down the information over so each side is on the
You go up by 2. So it'll be 10 minutes. And then if you add that
Over time, they started to get the answers. I wouldn't necessarily tell them if it was right because I wanted to wait until the very end where there was a video that actually showed them what it was. Thank you so much for having taken the time to watch this video. I know it got a little lengthy, but I was actually really excited to share these ideas with you. And feel free to take one idea, 2 ideas, or all 3 of the ideas and kind of make them your own in your classroom. This is not meant to be an end-all be-all kind of example of what you need to do step by step, as much as I want to share like why the folder was the way it was. Again, the core concept was just shifting from teacher-centered to student-centered and kind of how I was able to do that. And at the end of the day, it's ultimately what works best for you. Whatever path you do decide to take, the only thing I recommend is that you stick to it. Whether you just do mapping, just do measuring up live sheets, or just Khan Academy, or even just Dan Meyer stuff, what I found throughout the years that none of these were just a quick fix, a quick solution to my problems, is that ultimately it took perseverance through all of them to really make them work. And with that, like I said, if you ever have any questions, please reach out to me at my email, oros.luis@gmail.com, and I would love to answer any questions you may have. Good luck.